And Bob, would you like to start us off?
Well, you were doing a wonderful job, Chris, so why don't you continue for a while, then I'll jump in there later.
All righty. As we are seeing, would you tell us your credentials as an immigration attorney?
Would be happy to. And first, Chris, Wes, thank you for hosting me once again. It's a privilege to be here. I enjoyed our last visit, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your viewers. I had the privilege of nearly 4 years serving as a federal prosecutor in Brooklyn at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and went into private practice thereafter in a firm established by my father. We're about 50 people in Midtown Manhattan, and all we practice is U.S. immigration law. And it was an interesting challenge for me when I left the government, having deported and sent out drugsters and mobsters and prosecuted a lot of people, to then go into private practice. The challenge that I had ultimately was met when we dealt with anti-terrorism issues. I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit about it. The bread and butter of our practice, however, are tons, if not thousands, of individuals that are coming to our doors, individuals that are looking to come to the United States, mostly legal, for employment or for family reunification. The bread and butter, if you would, of our practice are your typical professional workers that are working for banks and companies. And we take the same pride and practice, if you would, to individuals who are either CEOs or housekeepers. And any given day we'll have a fashion model, a rock star, or we could have a person who works in a store or is a driver. And the same respect and dignity they receive is how we have always held the mantra of our practice. But to give you a sense of our practice, we deal exclusively in the field of immigration. And I've had the privilege of growing up in a home where my father was one of a handful of immigration lawyers when the field erupted, if you would, because of the burgeoning interest coming to our country. And the challenge that I had when I left the government was to make sure that I had not only a good snapshot of the resources that the government had, but that I provided ample opportunity when I went into private practice to give a government a snapshot of the vulnerabilities that we had since and before 9/11.
Since 9/11, do you foresee any more problems that we would have in the country itself?
Well, relating this to immigration policy, I have to tell you that I've seen a lot of Band-Aids put on open wounds that won't be healed adequately, and a lot of, until this point, some missteps. I don't see Congress having the moxie that it takes to effectively change immigration law so that it's effective. You have 12 million individuals in this country that are here without the authority to be here. Entering the United States surreptitiously is a criminal offense, but the maintaining of your illegal presence is a civil fine. People don't understand that. When you have what looks to be at least 4 or 5% of our workforce walking around without health insurance, life insurance, and potentially having problems that we as taxpayers have to pay for, there's no leadership in Washington. And who ends up footing the bills? The local taxpayer. As a mayor of a city in New Jersey, if there's an individual that's here illegally and their child goes to a school, they go to school for free. Who pays for that? The local taxpayer. If somebody's hurt, you see there are muster zones throughout the state of New Jersey where people who are not lawfully here muster on corners waiting for employment. If somebody gets hurt working in somebody's backyard trying to dig a pool and he goes to a hospital, who pays for the repair of that leg or that arm? The taxpayers. Because there's no comprehensive vision, if you would, coming from Washington. And because of the lack of comprehensive vision, and because of the lack of adequate systems that could have and should have been put in place way before 9/11, we as Americans still remain vulnerable. But I don't think we need to live in fear of a few. We just have to take pride in our immigrant foundation and make sure that we're effective with our immigration policy, protecting American laborers and at the same time dealing with the 12 million people that are not going to leave, that are not going to be massively deported or arrested. Nobody disagrees that an alien absconder, a person who was ordered deported and remained, or a criminal shouldn't be deported. We all agree that. But what do you do with the 12 million people that are working jobs less than $10 an hour in restaurants, in hotels? The unions we see have reached out to them, which is an extraordinary experience to see the unions engaged now in raising their mantle. And we have to meet this challenge effectively.
Well, let me ask you, why is it that they permit these people to stay in the country if they're illegal? And even like with the sweatshops, who's that, Kathy Lee, I think a couple of years back had a problem with that there.
The problem is of different proportions, if you would. There aren't effective controls in place to monitor people coming into the United States while they're here, and then even marking people's departures. We don't have an effective departure control system leaving the United States. Any country across this world has an effective departure control. The intelligence value of somebody leaving the country is as often important as when somebody came into the United States. When 9/11 happened, we were led vulnerable because of a disconnect, if you would, between the different intelligence services who gathered information but didn't prevent these attacks. I would say that with the technology and the advancements that we've made, we still have a way to go when it comes to dealing with these issues. And if you take the oxygen, if you would, out of this problem, the employers that are taking for granted illegal employment, illegal individuals that is, you take the money out of it, so to say, you punish these employers effectively. They have laws on the books and they're not enforcing them. In 1986, President Reagan passed the Reform and Control Act, the Immigration Reform and Control Act, that basically and effectively not only gave amnesty to the millions that were there at that time, but then said we need to punish employers. And they have not fined employers in years because they don't have the resources. Since then, they said the idea of amnesty was not proper. So they came up with an earned equation. So there was a deadline of January 14, 1998. If you got a case in by then, we'll help you. Then it was April 30, 2001. Then the 9/11 attacks happened. So to answer your question, you know, the businesses will get away with whatever they can get away with if there's no cop on the block watching them. And who pays for this? The taxpayer. Who should deal with this? Members of Congress. The problem is that they are deemed to be weak on terrorism when they're bright on immigration. And immigration is a confluence of labor and humanitarianism, technology, and a lot of arenas. It's not something that you can do a talking point on.
Well, what type of a message could the taxpayer send to Washington to let them know that, hey, we're fed up with this?
I'll give you a couple of examples of cases that I've handled. You know, everybody knows about Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. There was an African-American athlete who was sleeping on the plane. His name is Kwame James. And Kwame was awoken by a flight attendant when Richard Reed started to ignite his shoes. And he subdued Richard Reed. And then when the two F-14s followed this flight back to Logan Airport, and they were going to work a deal with Kwame, who was from Trinidad, that he would cooperate in the prosecution of Richard Reed, the deal fell through when Richard Reed pled guilty. And then instead of helping Kwame, who rose to the occasion and literally sat on a terrorist for hours, they turned their back on him. And I met him, and I took his case on without a fee. It's unfortunate, but the government doesn't get it sometimes. Our job is not to challenge them all the time, but to remind them that if you come into our family, into our home, we are going to embrace you. Certainly, I can't think of any greater national interest that he's served than saving not only millions of dollars of property, but the lives of those individuals on that plane. But I've seen time memoriam cases where spouses of World Trade Center victims were almost put into proceedings because of nuances in their law. These terrorists received approvals for their visas days after the 9/11 attacks. This shows you a bureaucracy not only without a heart, but without a vision. And if this is what's happening, and if there is a disconnect on this, you can be